All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and begin our fourth panel, the synthesis discussion, talking about the future of oyster restoration in Chesapeake Bay. We've covered a lot about what's happened. We did a nice overview, what's happening currently. Now, where do we go from here? What does this all mean? To lead this conversation, we've got Andy Lacatell from the Nature Conservancy and Zachary Greenberg from Charitable Trust, who will kick things off for us with a very robust panel that we've gathered here today.
Great, thanks, Tanner, and hopefully you can hear me okay.
Sound great.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so thanks again, Tanner, and yeah, thanks again for the Oyster Alliance and the Bay Foundation for making this possible today, and also for all the attendees that are tuning in from the Bay, across the country, and across the world too. My name is Zack Greenberg, and I work at the Charitable Trust on our Conserving Marine Life in the U.S. project. And so, like Tanner was saying, this is the fourth and final panel today, and it's going to be a discussion about the future of oyster restoration in the Bay. And before I turn this over to Andy to help moderate in our panel, I do just want to give a brief introduction just to frame out the discussion that we're going to have. So as we heard today, oyster populations and reef habitat in the Bay have been challenged by disease, overharvest, and habitat loss. And as we've heard, restoring oyster reefs at a large scale is the primary approach used by managers to recover oyster populations and their associated ecosystem services or co-benefits, right? So that's oysters filter the water, their reefs offer refuge and habitat for many wildlife species, and reefs absorb wave energy too, as we were learning, and they increase the coast resilience to storms. And so we've also heard about the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, which was put into place in 2014 and calls for state and federal partners to restore native oyster habitat and populations in 10 Bay tributaries by 2025. And so here we are over 10 years later, and the proof of concept has been demonstrated. As we've seen, ecosystem services and economic benefits are being quantified, and collaboration really does characterize restoration projects large, small across the watershed. And so with all this, and despite the challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic over the past year, oyster reef restoration has continued to make significant progress. And that's thanks to many of the partners involved. And so together, the Bay States last year alone restored over 85 acres of oyster reefs, completing restoration in the Maryland's Little Choptank River and Virginia's eastern branch of the Elizabeth River. And also with continued investments by the states of Maryland and Virginia and the completion of all 10 tributary restoration blueprints, it's safe to say we're racing towards the 2025 deadline. And I'm sure confident that we're gonna achieve it. But now I think is a really good opportunity to start asking the question about what comes next. And so to focus on this question, I do want to make sure we keep a few things in mind for the panel today. You know, I think first is just the global aspect of this work. And I think that's already been demonstrated by the regional, national, international interest in today's symposium, but also by the fact that oyster reefs are one of the planet's most imperiled marine habitats, with 85 to 90% of wild oyster reefs lost over the past century. And then I think second is that we're not going to have all the answers today, you know, and instead today's panel is really meant to begin a conversation. So focusing in on that intersection of oyster science, management, and restoration, and then also what we've learned and what we may still have to learn about restoration. So that's why I'm really excited to hear from some of the leaders that have made large-scale oyster restoration possible, and also who will help define the future of oyster restoration in the Bay. And so I know I did see a few questions already about this question about what comes next. So I am excited to hear from our panelists. I'll just mention that, you know, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'll be keeping track of those during the conversation. And I think with that, Andy, I'll turn it over to you to get started. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Really appreciate that. And thanks for framing our discussion today. First off, hello to our panelists. So glad you all are here. It's a great group. And thank you to Tanner and Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Oyster Alliance for you know, giving us the opportunity to have this discussion with these great folks. You know, I think one of the challenges we have being the last panel is that we don't want to repeat ourselves and ask the same questions. So I'm hopeful this group will be maybe giving a slightly different perspective on some things, and We know that we are in between you and happy hour. So whatever happy hour looks like in the COVID era. So we will try to keep our responses brief, and we're going to try to pack a lot into 45 minutes. I'm sure we're going to emphasize some things that have already been emphasized, but I think, Zack really captured the big picture is, where do we go from here, and what are the things that we need to do restoration better, maybe more collaboratively, more efficiently moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our panel, and I'm going to start with Andrew Button. And I'm sure you all have seen everybody's introductions and bios. So we're going to skip the formalities and just go straight to the questions today, if that's all right. So Andrew, you are on the front lines of oyster restoration and management in Virginia. And I think it's fair to say that oyster restoration doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger system of stakeholders and interests. Could you speak to the relationship between restoration, aquaculture, and the wild fishery?
Absolutely, sure. I'll do a quick sound check there, coming in loud and clear. All right. I guess you threw me off a little bit there. I had my introduction prepared, but we're going right to the questions, but I'll get right to it.
Right.
No, when it comes to how everything, I guess, is tied together, at least I'll try my best to speak for Virginia, and there's probably some overlap in Maryland, but I am a little bit Virginia centric in my statements, for the record there. But really, the way that sort of, I would say, those big three, aquaculture, the wild fishery, and restoration, at least we try to keep them interacting in Virginia, is to really try to focus on, and I know Zack touched on it, the co-benefits that those aspects of the oyster fishery and the oyster resource and the oyster population really have. And we're fortunate in Virginia in that many of the same people are involved in all aspects of that. So many of the people involved in the wild fishery also participate on the aquaculture side of things. And we do have pretty good partnerships with many of those same folks on the restoration side of things. So we're able to contract with watermen in some cases. Some oyster buyers will purchase their shell for restoration work, and really trying to, wherever possible, focus on the things that are working. And then one of the things that really does sort of tie all of those together is literally all of this is happening in the same space. So I know there's been lots of presentations at this point on oyster populations over the years and harvest numbers going up and down. And if you break those out and you look at restoration efforts, you look at harvest production on private ground, harvest production on public ground, the effort that's being put into all three of those, they really do all track up and down and together. And I think that that's really for two major reasons, one of which is they're literally in the same watershed. So water quality, if your hatchery isn't working, chances are that your natural spat set isn't working, which means that production on the public fishery is going to take a drop. Your restoration is going to be harder, and your aquaculture, which is dependent on hatcheries, is going to go down too. And in terms of large scale oyster restoration and going forward, one of the things that we can work on and that we've been doing well, and I'd like to see going on in the future, is when we're working on these projects. And Joe Rager from Elizabeth River brought up that project we worked on in the Eastern Branch this last summer, and using the shell base that we used there is a byproduct of our normal dredging operation, and using that for a restoration project actually helped lower the per unit cost for shell by increasing the size of the contract for work that we did in other restoration sites, as well as replenishment activity on public ground. So sort of highlighting points like that and how everything is connected and works together is really important going forward.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, you hit on a number of things: partnerships and efficiencies and interactions, biological interactions as well. It's, the whole system's tied together. Angie, with the Corps of Engineers, you all are you're in a position where partnerships are kind of essential to you being able to put your projects in the water. So considering some of the things that Andrew just said, what would you like to see in terms of coordination of resources and effort, among the states or various sectors of the industry?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. That's correct. You say oyster restoration, just a little background if you're not familiar with our programs. We require a non-federal cost share partner. So that is, our projects are funded typically 75% federal and 25% non-federal money. So, and the non-federal cost share partner can provide that as either cash or in kind. So for example, in Maryland, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources has primarily fulfilled the non-federal portion as in-kind contribution by planting spat on shell on the reef habitat that's constructed with our federal dollars. So we have done a really good job, I think, of working with and partnering with NGOs, state and federal, between state and federal resource agencies, as well as academic institutions to implement and monitor these large-scale restoration projects. However, I think there are many other opportunities to broaden those partnerships and to pool. There's many sectors that have an interest in restoration and management of oysters in the bay. And so I think we have a lot more opportunity to pull in broader interests. So over the long history of oyster management in the bay, ecosystem restoration has typically been viewed as exclusive of fishery restoration. However, going forward, I think it's going to be invaluable if future restoration efforts could partner more broadly across the various sectors of the oyster industry to develop projects that integrate multiple goals and needs. Broadening these partnerships would build further support for our bay-wide restoration efforts. There's clear need to set aside significant portions of oyster habitat as sanctuaries that are protected from harvest. I think our last couple of years of effort have shown that. Unharvested reefs provide diverse three-dimensional habitat and a variety of ecosystem values. The challenge that I see is how to maintain or update that sanctuary network to enable future restoration that may be blended with diverse industry uses. So can we devise integrated networks with protected source reefs for production of spat with three-dimensional reef habitat and targeted sink areas for harvest? So how can we better integrate the broader goals of the oyster community throughout the bay? There are a lot of things to figure out in order to make an idea like that a success. And USACE's role, based on our authority, would remain focused on sanctuary efforts, but an integrated approach would serve to better broaden consensus and the benefits for those significant restoration investments. So that's one thing that I'm interested in going forward, if there's a movement to integrate those broader goals. With regards to coordination between the states, and we have a Maryland effort and a Virginia effort, I think it's going to be continuing to be very important that we continue to communicate our efforts between the two states, and also our lessons learned and what's working and what's not, and maybe why things are or are not working. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. I'm gonna call an audible because of something you said, Angie, and I'm gonna switch over. I'm gonna switch over to Imani and ask you next, because we certainly do want broader representation and integration, and have all stakeholders represented at the table. And Imani, you're obviously personally involved in something that I think is a much needed element to this effort. So could you, oyster restoration, their designs are different, and oyster restoration looks different in different places, and the partners are different in different places, and the approaches are even different. And in some cases, approaches or designs that work in one place may not work in another. But sort of maybe thinking even broader than that, how can the restoration effort be more inclusive, particularly of minority and underserved communities, but just do a better job of getting more stakeholders to the table?
Yeah, well, definitely, I think that we need to start really evaluating some of our approaches in our restorative efforts. I think that just going forward, kind of like what Andrew was saying, just like really evaluating where our problems are, where we kind of had the struggles and setbacks and things like that. But within that conversation, the communities that we're doing these restorative efforts for need to be a part of the conversation. Whether they have the education or not, it's our job. If this industry and this restorative effort is that important to us, it is our job to educate them so that then they can have a seat at the table, but also an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing for their community. But inclusivity just involves the people of that community and what they actually need. So when we don't address what those communities actually need, not just what that environment needs, then we're not bringing those two together to be inclusive and diverse. We just have to open the door. We have to open the window, and we have to open the conversation, and so that everybody that's involved in that community is understanding, so that it's not just a one-time thing. This is a longevity. Restoration of our oyster populations, as we can see today, are very important to a lot of people. And so it's our job as the people that are experts within this field with many educations, with many different disciplines, that we keep expanding those things. So I just think that is probably like our first step, is just really bringing more people, more diverse people to the table and to the conversation, so that we just have a wide range and a wide view of what the issues actually are that we can address moving forward.
Can I ask you a follow-up? Particular to or specific to the aquaculture industry, where do you see the role of aquaculture and some of the stakeholders that you represent? What role do you think they can play, and how do we maybe touch on some of the benefits that are mutual benefits between restoration and aquaculture?
Yeah, I think that we just really need to start taking some attentive action. Environmental justice has been in our vocabulary for decades now, but yet a lot of our marine spaces are still not diverse. And so there's a reason for that. We really have to start recognizing what are the obstacles that minorities are facing within and entering these spaces, and be really real about those obstacles, and be wanting and willing to work through them and support the people that are interested in our industry to help move it forward. Really meeting people where they are with their environmental education, and just having that representation to show people that this is a really important industry, and that there's many different disciplines that you can do, and many different ways that you can engage within our industry to keep it evolving and rapidly growing as it is today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Chris, so while we're on the topic of learning new things and trying to put new initiatives into place and maybe thinking a little bit broader, we've heard some amazing presentations today, and we've learned quite a bit on both the technical side of things and the partnership side of things. What would you say, from the NGO perspective that's been working on oyster restoration for years? What are some of the big lessons that we've learned, and maybe some of the challenges going forward?
Yeah, so lessons learned. I think obviously, kind of you talked about technology, is make sure we use the technology that's out there to plan our restoration efforts in the future. When we started doing oyster restoration, we kind of went back to what was historically there, and we tried to use some of the old techniques, I'll call it, in order to do restoration. And we found out that they just don't work today. It's what it amounts to. An earlier presentation today, Joe mentioned kind of the rows that we're now using in order to do restoration. I think that's somewhere where we've, again, developed a new technique that not only works better because we actually get more flow over top the oyster reef that we're actually building, but also we're saving resources. And we need to be as thoughtful in our resource implementation, as possible moving forward. I think from an NGO perspective too, the need and the want in a lot of cases for us to be flexible and make sure, one, our projects succeed, but also succeed in the area that we're actually doing them. And I think you've seen a difference today in some of those projects. We've talked about some of the really large projects that the Army Corps undertakes, and groups like TNC undertake, and CBF. But we've also seen some really successful projects that happen in very small spaces, again, like the Elizabeth River Project undertakes. And those NGOs know the people on the ground. They know where to find help to make those work, and get people involved locally, and really spread the excitement about oysters. And so I think that's another real opportunity for NGOs in the oyster space, is is getting people involved, working on the advocacy part of things, and working on it throughout various different levels, whether it's this, federal level, state level, or kind of right in their backyard.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, great perspective on that. Sean, with NOAA, Chesapeake Bay office. It's 2021, if you didn't know, and 2025 is fast approaching. NOAA's been tasked, I think with, thinking about sort of the big picture of large scale restoration. And at the same time, you've been tasked with, kind of the day-to-day accounting of restoration efforts and what has been successful, and counting those acres towards meeting our 2025 Bay goals. Is now the right time to be thinking about what comes after 2025?
In short, yeah. I think so.
I was hoping you would say that.
That doesn't mean that we need to take our foot off the gas on the current work that we're doing. There's things are going great, and we really are on track, it appears, to achieve our restoration outcome of 10 tributaries by 2025. That's thanks to this collective effort of a lot of the folks who are represented on the call here and who we've heard talk earlier. It's a really great example of a cross-organizational outcome that we've pulled together to work on. But that took a long time. This paradigm that we have right now, I think this morning, Stephanie Westby kicked things off by talking about, we've been doing this for about 30 years. And the first 20 of them, we were we were refining our technique to get to the place where we are right now. So we've learned a whole lot about how to be successful at a larger scale. And some of those things include a recognition that we need to have a clearly identified common goal that we're working towards. We need to have a clear understanding of the commitments of the different people who are participating in it. In some cases, for example, anything we're going to do at large scale is going to be dependent upon Maryland and Virginia playing a really active role, because these are, they're the ones that are really responsible for the natural resources at the level that we're talking about. And then, just touching on some of the things that Angie just talked about, and Imani, there's a real interest and a real opportunity to take advantage of merging all three sectors. And Andrew touched on this too. I think it's something we're all pretty enthusiastic about, bringing together aquaculture, wild harvest, and restoration. And a part of that is because for a number of years, over the past 10 years, where there's been these really great advances in restoration, sometimes that's come either in spite of a lot of tension between those three sectors, or and at times there's been some collaboration, but a lot of times the question's been posed about how, well, we're going to do one of these three things and not the other two. And so there's a lot of energy that gets expended on trying to sort that out. And, like Andrew was saying, it's not just Virginia. Even in Maryland, if you step back and you really look at it, although each one of these different sectors is very well designed and has it's kind of a stepwise progression to get to where it currently is, there isn't currently a plan, particularly in Maryland, that says, well, how are we integrating these three sectors? And how could a project benefit all three of those so that all three of the sectors could get behind advocating for this work and see benefits that would come from it? Some of the speakers we talked to earlier today talked about Harris Creek, one of the first big large-scale tributary that we started in. There's several aquaculture farms inside the Harris Creek sanctuary, but it's not necessarily part of that restoration plan. And just outside or just over the line, there's commercial harvest going on for the wild harvest. And yet those, there's not a real solid intersection. So pulling those together, I think, will be important. And then I would say, so we need to be looking at implementing things on an inspirational scale. Where we've been right now is inspirational. We've pushed it to the largest oyster restoration project in the world, but also practical, right? So we want it to be something big and inspirational that blends sectors, but that we could actually get done. And if you look back over the past, say, 30 years, the scope of the work that we've done has been expanding over time from kind of a reef scale to a tributary scale, particularly in some areas like the Choptank or the Middle Peninsula of Virginia, where we're starting to get multiple tributaries that are in close proximity to one another. One could argue we're looking at kind of a sub-regional scale. So thinking about creative ways to bring this work to the next scale, and that it's as inclusive as possible. So that we're gonna need to have a target or a goal that hits things like, nutrient reduction. We heard about that earlier today, or fish habitat enhancement. Benefiting the water quality or the total maximum daily load. Harvest and economic benefit. As well as the ecological returns.
Thank you, Sean. And in fact, I'm gonna switch up our order again, and that only the panelists know the order. So I'm giving things away here a bit. But Angie, just to kind of follow up on that, our oyster restoration goals are largely based currently on acres, and we have obviously some success criteria and metrics associated with what those acres look like. But not all acres that have been restored in the bay are functioning equally. They weren't all created equally. Is an acreage goal sufficient, or should we be thinking about maybe something that Sean is kind of alluding to here? Something new, complementary, more inspirational, more comprehensive. What should our goals start to look like?
Hi, yeah, great question. The acreage goal will always be important. Pre-2009, restoration efforts taught us the value of scale. Prior to that time, efforts were small, scattered, disconnected. We did a poor job at records keeping, and monitoring was essentially non-existent. So those efforts and their lack of measurable success demonstrated the need to have a system level impact. The scale of a project is, I think the efforts have shown us that the scale is critical to a project's success, and acreage is really how we design for that and measure it. With that said, I do think that there's a great opportunity to develop a much broader communication of the value and how we define success, that is not just limited to acreage. That full complement of benefits that we've seen in some of the prior presentations that have been worked on really would provide a bigger picture of what we're achieving. So past oyster densities, we're looking at spat production, output to the surrounding areas, characterizing the reef assemblage and bottom diversity, fisheries enhancements, water quality, filtration value, estimates of the nutrient management and carbon sequestration, all those, the aspects, how we affect sediment and bottom stability, and the economic value of restoration. If we could package all that up and present this picture of what we're achieving by our investment, I think that would go very far in that inspirational vision, and some of that may have very significant research needs to achieve how to communicate those aspects, but the research community has come a long way and put a lot of effort in other pieces of that picture. So if we could do a better job to communicate those diverse benefits and values associated with those significant restoration investments, I think it would help to build that broader consensus for large-scale restoration and demonstrate the value associated with maintaining significant portions of the bay as sanctuaries, and build support to pursue efforts past those, the 10 tributaries by 2025.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Angie. I think you've touched on something that I've certainly learned and identified over the last couple of years is the value of communication and an integrated communication model framework. And I think we're working on that. We're moving in the right direction on that, but it's still obviously very challenging, especially when you don't have all the answers. And there are things that we need to figure out. And we'll touch on communication a little bit more here in a second, but I wanted to ask Andrew Button, always the elephant in the room is money. And we don't want to discount the role that funding plays in making sure that these projects happen. So Andrew, you've heard, money makes the world go round. So let's deal with that. Virginia's been in a pretty enviable position over the last couple of years getting towards our restoration goals. What do you think funding needs to look like going forward after 2025?
Well, just for the record, the increase in funding for oyster restoration is not correlated to an increase in my personal paycheck. It is maybe a little bit in terms of workload, but mostly the ability to actually complete and implement these projects. With that little disclaimer out of the way, I think one of the most valuable things that we have when we're looking forward is being able to look backwards on what we've done. And in terms of coming up with a plan for the funding that's needed is anyone who remembers the various work groups that many of the folks on this panel have sat on and many other folks have been presented on and getting down into the weeds of how much does an oyster restoration project actually cost. The answer for the future is somewhere between about what we're doing now and a whole lot more. But to sort of put a finer point on that, I really think that one of the things that will be lessons learned in terms of that funding question is really answering a lot of the questions that are coming up now in this panel discussion in terms of what do the metrics look like, actually where are we going to go next, and sort of answering all those other questions first in terms of, is it going to be an acreage goal, a fish habitat goal, where are the actual next places going to be, how can we leverage work that's already going on to either decrease costs for the direct restoration work, or sort of piggyback at that economy of scale going, whether it's with aquaculture projects or fisheries replenishment projects for harvest, and sort of look at all of those questions. And really that question almost answers itself once you've done everything else to it. Is once you have what you're going to do and your plan. That was one of the things that I think getting this $10 million that a lot of the folks here in this meeting and on this call and on this panel helped to do in terms of Virginia were able to articulate after literally, I guess, years of planning, was sort of putting a fine enough range on a one-page document that says, this is how much we think it's going to cost to get to that goal. And sort of being able to distill all that down into something that you could take to whoever your funding source is and say, this is how much it's going to cost. This is what you're going to get for it. And basically try to keep it as simple as you can like that is really sort of the key. And all the work that goes into making that simple that we're just starting to discuss now is really going to be key to having that definitive answer. But really look at what worked for the past effort, looking at oysters as natural infrastructure. For all the things that were touched on here, whether it's gray infrastructure to green infrastructure, and sort of having all that additional value that you're getting out of there quantifiable helps make that ultimate ask for funding that much more digestible from the folks who would be funding it. So really a lot of hard work and planning, and then distill it down to something that you can say, here it is, here's a number, here's what you're getting, and go from there. So that's sort of more work like this is sort of what needs to happen to get to that answer.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, sure. Demonstrating results, documenting the return on investment, telling that bigger picture. Those are all parts of lobbying, for lack of a better word, for additional and continued funding. I think one of the things that we've been concerned about in the larger restoration effort is when we have gaps in funding and the pipeline turns off and we have to kind of restart things, and it's we're in a much better position if we can continue to tell a successful story, and document that well. Chris, I want to throw you, Chris is an umpire. I'm going to throw him a little bit of a curveball, see if he can pick this one up. So, I was going to ask you about sort of trends in restoration and science and technology, but I feel like we've done that pretty well in this conference already today. What do you think our biggest technology or science need is at this point? Like, what if we were to, $1 million falls out of the sky for research or for technology, where should we spend that money? What would help us the most?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things at this point. One, understanding what really makes oysters set in the location that you're building the reef. And I think that's obviously variable in some places. We're looking at all sorts of different types of substrate in some cases. We're looking at what type of animals that may already be on the reef are helping oysters set, what may be attracted to those. So I think that's one would just be a giant technology leap is, what are the conditions that make oysters set? We've heard, in some of the earlier presentations about water quality not being great. We're worried about salinity changes due to climate change. But if we can make sure that every time we build a project and we get ready to put oysters on it, or we want to have it naturally set, that it has a really, really high set rate, that would be, I think, number one there. And then two, continuing to look for alternative substrates that are very cost effective. We know that we can't use shell only in order to do our restoration projects. And Joe Rieger earlier mentioned, the cost of some different projects, some different materials for construction. So I think things that will allow us to continually do this in a cost-effective manner is another piece. And it may take some outside of the box thinking to make that happen.
Great, great perspective on that. Imani, Angie touched on communication a bit, and I want to get maybe some advice or wisdom from you, from your experiences. What in terms of setting goals and involving stakeholders, engaging a community, what are some communication strategies that you think are effective, that should be used, and things that should be avoided? We're talking about state and federal, government projects don't always have great success stories in trying to communicate things well. So yeah, what kind of communication strategies would be helpful in reaching a broader community and engaging more stakeholders?
Yeah, I think specifically with, minority just stakeholders and just minority engagement, the most important thing that I've just found is really meeting people where they are with their environmental education. I know I touched on this a little bit earlier, but that environmental education is really important for what people are going to be interested in and what they're going to essentially want to be involved in. And if we skip all the steps and kind of just put out these programs, great programs respectively of oyster restoration and everything else of restoration of the bay, and sort of skip that step, then there is no longevity of wanting to get into the field long term. We really have to start making people and helping people understand how does my everyday environment affect me, and how do I affect my everyday environment, and then build from there. We can't skip all the way from, okay, oysters are really important, especially when some people like in inner cities and urban places have never even seen an oyster or don't have access to green spaces or waterfront property or at all. And so really helping them understand where they are today, how their environment is affecting them today, and how they can help their everyday environment in the present day and in the future, and then building on those things, on the organisms and the marine life that need our help in our restoration efforts. Then we can start helping people really understand why it's truly important, why it's truly why we truly need to be engaged in it. And another thing is just representation. Like many people know, African Americans have a huge and long and rich history on the Chesapeake Bay, people of color in general, and yet we're not present. And really knowing and helping people understand that it's not that we're trying to bring people back, especially with my organization, Minorities in Aquaculture. It's not that we're trying to bring people into a new space. We're trying to bring our organizations and our community and our fisheries back full circle, so that everybody's involved, everyone has a seat at the table, and everyone's understanding what efforts we're trying to do, why they're important, and how they can help be engaged and help implement those things in just their everyday lives, but hopefully in their career development. We want people, like I said, aquaculture is really important to all of us. I think we've really shown all day that we're really passionate about the things that are going on within our industry. So it's really important so that we help people really see that this is a career option, a viable career option that they should step into, they should care about, and that they should bring any discipline that they're interested in, whether it's being on the water or engineering or communications or weld or being a mechanic or anything like that, to help really move aquaculture forward continuously and in a long lasting way. So I think those two things are just really important with just engagement and just like community outreach in general. Is we can't skip steps. This isn't going to happen overnight. Diversity and inclusion, yeah, they're buzzwords and everybody wants to jump on the train, and I can be honest about that. And if we are honest about that and really honest about the mistakes that we've made in our diversity and inclusion efforts towards restoration and just conservation on the bay, then we can start really changing the tide and really just start changing what our industry is about, who we're engaging, and all the parameters that we can really expand to locally and globally with aquaculture.
That's great. That's so helpful and such a great perspective. Yeah, thank you for that. Sean, maybe before we transition to into some questions, you're involved in bay restoration initiatives, obviously across the bay. How would you kind of stack up the oyster restoration effort against other bay goals and restoration efforts, whether it be water quality, habitat, fisheries? Where do oysters stand in the larger restoration picture?
Well, oysters are holding their own. So you're right. There are a lot of other initiatives, large landscape scale initiatives, both terrestrial and in the water. There are examples of other goals and outcomes, as you've alluded to, and probably many folks on this at the conference here are aware that the Bay program sets a series of overarching goals, and then there's a batch of outcomes associated with those goals. There are 31 of those outcomes to be precise, and oysters is just one of them. So there are a lot of other ambitious initiatives that are moving forward, and some of them are really going gangbusters. For example, land acquisition is one that your organization, Andy, and others are really actively involved in making sure that moves forward well. There are some that are a little bit of a mixed bag, and I think that probably reflects the evolution of the program overall. Increasingly, the Bay program has been focused on quantifiable outcomes, and there are certain key components that you need to have in place in order to effectively mark progress towards achieving quantifiable outcomes. And so, as a card-carrying bureaucrat, I can say that although it doesn't sound all that exciting, some of the things that we've been talking about in this session really relate to planning and a clear understanding of who's going to do what, how much is it going to cost, what are you trying to achieve, who's these sort of basic issues. So in oysters, the way we've done the oyster restoration, we've used these things called blueprints, and the blueprints include all of that information. They also require kind of a common vernacular. So for years, decades, there was a lot of great restoration work going on at all different scales, but people had never sat down and compromised to agree on a consistent set of terms. So it was very difficult to then capture progress across multiple organizations because it was defined differently within those. And some of the other groups, whether it be wetlands, a whole host, forest buffers, for example, other outcomes like this, which quite a lot of good work is going on, but perhaps the common set of definitions, the common set of the standardized metrics, the clear planning targets, a partitioning of the overarching goal into very specific targets that are allocated across the watershed and add up to a complete picture. That hasn't always been in place. So what you have, the reason why I was saying it was a mixed bag is because in some cases, as the program has been evolving, we continued to rely on non-quantifiable goals. You know, for example, one of the goals under the fisheries goal implementation team that I'm working with is on fish habitat. And that outcome is to continually improve our understanding of fish habitat. It's got some other specific ideas like that, but it doesn't say, you know, restore X amount of fish habitat by this date. Part of the reason why we didn't do that in that case is because we knew we could do some good things to improve fish habitat, and we can explain what we're going to do, but we weren't prepared to commit to that level of specificity for that specific outcome. So having kind of the sort of self-awareness of what, when the conditions are right, when you have the kind of relationships that you need across nonprofit, university, federal, and state partners to really partition a project out and hold one another accountable to achieving it. We have that with oysters. We don't necessarily have that consistently across all of the other goals. And where you get in trouble is when you try to set a really tightly quantifiable goal without all those other pieces in place, because it's because you won't be able to hold yourself accountable. Just one other thing that I would point out is, because I think we have an opportunity, you know, going into planning, whether it's oysters or any of the other goals under the Bay program. One of the nice things about setting up a blueprint like that and identifying roles and responsibilities is that you can define why we're doing things. So we've talked about, you know, nutrient credits or fish habitat or oyster larval production or whatever. Some of the things that Imani's talking about, you know, really intentionally including diversity elements like this. This is something that we want to do restoration projects where we want to integrate aquaculture into restoration for these specific social objectives, societal objectives. That can be done, but again, I would say it's going to be important to really explicitly call those things out and find people who are going to participate in the conversation so that we can mark progress as we're going forward. So there is an opportunity for us to do that with oysters and elsewhere around the program.
It's great. Thanks, Sean. So I'm watching the time here. I want to keep us on schedule. First thing I want to do is I want to thank our panelists before I forget to do that. Thank you all for your contributions. There are a few questions that I would like to ask from the audience here. And one is on nutrient credit training. This Johnny Shockley submitted this, but we had thought about maybe trying to answer this question ahead of time as well. I might maybe direct this to Chris. So, you know, we've talked about value of restoration, benefits to oysters. We've talked about nutrient credit trading a little bit in the symposium today. Yeah, where do you think the role of nutrient credit trading is? What do you think the role is going to be in the larger restoration effort? I mean, this is a bit of prognostication with, you know, still some science kind of sitting out there. But what role do you think nutrient credit trading will play going forward?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a little tough to figure out the role. I think what is exciting to me about it now is it's a real opportunity for all of us involved in restoration and aquaculture to see new resources come into play. There's been a lot of talk about, a lot of this work being grant funded and things like that. Working for CBF, we're lucky enough to be able to bring private funds to the table as well. But nutrient credit trading really may be able to bring some new resources and maybe some new ideas to the table when it comes to this restoration effort. And whether it's helping more aquaculture companies make a few more dollars, I don't think we're going to see aquaculture companies in any way, shape, or form pop up just because of nutrient credit trading. And I think that was discussed a little bit earlier today. But it may put some more dollars in their pocket and allow them to hire more people and to grow a bit. And that's obviously a good thing. I think obviously municipalities are going to be looking at this as they continue to move towards 2025 and having to meet pollution goals. Again, if they have opportunities to take advantage of restoration efforts that provide nutrient credits in the amount they need to meet their goals, and that may be another opportunity there as well. And I think the third place where I don't think a lot of people have thought about this a whole lot, but where I think it is probably maybe the most benefit in the future is, some of the really big companies that want to make investments in green infrastructure or really want to see green investments take off and have a lot of capital that they want to expend. I think that's really where we have a big opportunity to see nutrient credit trading come into play and really make some big plays on the ground.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So two other questions, one from the audience and then one I'll ask just of the group. This is from Dwayne Johnson, Black Girls Dive Foundation. Can somebody talk about the opposition of, it says real estate developers, but I might include, waterfront landowners to oyster restoration efforts. I think Joe touched on this earlier in his experience in Elizabeth River project, but can you talk a little bit about, sort of perceived and real opposition between and conflict between waterfront users and how that's maybe being addressed? Who wants to tackle that light topic in 30 seconds or less? Andrew, all you.
I could take a crack at that. And fortunately, I dabble in that activity at VMRC, but I don't always take the brunt of those questions and complaints and concerns that come up. But I think the short answer is it's never going to entirely go away. I mean, you're always, no matter what. I like to joke that if at least half the people like what you're doing and half the people are upset what you're doing, that's probably good government. But I think the best answer to that is the way that you can mitigate for that is not surprise people. No one really likes a project if they didn't know it was going to happen. So whatever needs to happen to have that communication, which has been sort of an overarching theme in this discussion, needs to happen on the first go around before anything hits the water. So whether that's reaching out to those property owners, whether it's reaching out to who has that string of crab pots right along where you're going to do the restoration project, looking at their ID number and giving them a call and saying, hey, I'm letting you know this is coming up. Whatever the case is, sort of being that first point of contact before they see a barge showing up and rocks going in the water and go, what the heck's going on here, is really the key. But you're never going to get it entirely to go away, but that's probably the best you can do, as well as the outreach and turning that sort of opposition into partnership. That really we kind of lean on some of the NGOs to do that sort of work. Expanding that is really the best opportunity I think there is.
Great, thanks so much, Andrew. So I thought I would end on a lighter note, or a more optimistic note, or just an optimistic note. And this is for anybody on the panel that wants to chime in the couple minutes we have left here. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, where are we? What does oyster restoration look like, and how well is it working? I know it's working well. Just tell me how well it's working. What's your vision for restoration 10 to 15 years out? Or maybe we already answered this. Somebody's got to have. I know Sean's got something to say on that.
Well, I'll at least say that I think we'll be able to show an impact no matter where we've done projects. And, I think there's been a lot of discussion about scale, during this panel, but knowing that we really made a difference in the tributaries, the creeks, whatever you want to call it, that we went in and we made it, and that we did the work. And that may not only be just an increase in oysters, but it may be an increase in fish. It may be an increase in water clarity. It may be an increase in property values because that waterway is delisted now because of more filtration, things like that. So I think making sure that wherever we decide to go, we can see a quantifiable difference is one measure of success moving forward.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Chris on that point. I would also say, having a recognition and support. I would love to see folks involved with the aquaculture industry supporting restoration or supporting wild harvest, and vice versa. This kind of integrated model across sectors where we're all understand how this work can generate value to each one of those sectors, and enable us to work together to make larger collective projects that have more impact on the health and economy of the Bay.
Love it. Sounds great. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zack for some closing comments. But thank you to all the friendly faces on the panel here and partners and friends. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks to the panelists too. I was going to jump in on that question there before you turn it over, but I think one of the things 10 years out that I would like to see, and I think this is one of the summaries from the conversation today, is to have the momentum that we have today as strong, or if not stronger, 10 years from now. So not only meeting that 2025 finish line and getting there, but also moving right through it and into the next 5, 10, or 15 years of oyster restoration across the Bay. I think just a few other things that I'll just touch on. I mean, I think we heard it in the conversation, but the importance of partnerships, quantifiable or realistic goal setting too. And then of course, that last comment, Sean, about working across sectors is very important. And then of course, the critical piece of all this too is meeting communities where they live, work, and play. And so not just today, but again, that 10-year sort of goal that everybody is having a seat at the table and able to define the future of restoration. I think I'll leave it there. I'm about at time. So I guess just thanks again to the panelists and for the opportunity here, and thanks to all the attendees today. And Tanner, I think I can turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Zack. Thank you, Andy. Thank you to all the panelists, everybody, for being here. First, I want to congratulate the very long list of people who've been with us all day. I think that is a huge testament to the incredible work being done for the oyster in Chesapeake Bay and to the caliber of our panelists today. We've heard about the intense amount of restoration happening in the Bay, the massive amount still to go, how science and technology is pushing those efforts. We have seen evidence of a rapidly expanding aquaculture industry, the economic and technological opportunities on the horizon, which will further that trend. We have heard multiple calls for research, notably in ecosystem services, substrates, aquaculture, monitoring, climate change. We have heard about the race to 2025 and the landscape of opportunities and challenges beyond that. So while we have covered a lot of ground today, I think the subtext of the symposium has been, let's do more, let's go further, let's work smarter. So whether you're a seasoned oyster practitioner here in the Bay or someone considering entering this field, I hope you've taken away some new ideas on how to do just that. If you are viewing this from outside the watershed, I wish you the same and implore you to come to learn more from Chesapeake Bay and bring it back home to your local system. To that end, we will prepare and circulate a contact sheet of everyone who indicated their willingness to participate in that contact sheet at the point of registration. Use that list, review it, use it to make connections to our young scientists, young reef builders, and oyster growers. Reach out for advice. I think that you will find those folks looking back at you to improve the work and carry it on in the future. So I want to thank all of our lightning round speakers, our moderators, our panelists, and their respective organizations for their many contributions to the symposium, but especially for their contributions to oyster recovery at large. Thank you once again to Greenfin Studio for the excellent amount of work they have put into the symposium. And again, special thanks to you all, especially outside of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, who came to learn and listen today. Please do keep in touch. Shirley has dropped the link to the happy hours in the chat. Let's see here. So I'll get to those in just one second. I want to say that she's dropping also the link to a survey. Let's see here. Yeah, if you will please complete that survey while it's still fresh in your mind, it'll really help us to sharpen our approach for next year. Speaking of next year, I addressed this at the top of the program, but I will be the first to admit we didn't have time for every issue, much less every one on this program. But we're looking at next year, and we have many more topics, and we'll have many more speakers for next year. And we plan to host an excellent, much more interactive, in-person, sort of hybrid virtual event somewhere in the Bay watershed next year. So please stay tuned for that. Now, I'm very happy to invite you all to our happy hour breakout rooms. We've got it in the chat now. I've also sent it via email. It's been a long day. Let's kick back and have some fun and some informal conversation. You can meet all the lightning round presentations. Please go check them out. The Aquaculture room with Bill and Beth Walton, formerly of the Gulf and now working here in Virginia in aquaculture efforts. We also have Doug Myers from CBF, Stump the Scientist. Go to that one if you're out of the watershed or even in the watershed and you want to mess with Doug. He is willing to take any question about the Bay watershed head on. And finally, story time with Paula. So bring your worst and best stories of your jobs in oyster aquaculture for a lively conversation there. You can also jump in and out of those Zoom rooms. Zoom, they've made it new so you can jump out of those breakout rooms. And just for fun, if you could tell me what the musical theme of today has been, I will send you an excellent oyster knife and gloves. If you answer elevator music, I will probably just send you some wet shells. So again, thank you all so much. I hope to see many of you next year and hopefully sooner. I really appreciate you participating today. Thanks again.